Journey of the Beloved, Part 1, Chapter 1, Sword of Orion. Thoth speaks. As Thoth Muzurud, I came within a Veska of light, a Merkaba of golden and blue-white fire, from Rigel through the Asvetas, the belt of Orion, and descended unto Rastaru, which in parentheses I have Rastau, the etheric manifold of the plane of Gisa. With me I brought the Enochian table, containing the blueprint for the building of the Temple of the Risen One, later to be called the Temple of the Lion, which is now known as the Great Pyramid. I will pause here and say that he does not mention the other pyramids around it, but they too were part of that complex. So if I were putting this into publication, I would make an editing correction there. However, the Great Pyramid itself is the main pivotal node of the entire complex. The year in your time calculations when this great temple was begun was 10,400 BC. Its construction was completed in 10,348 BC. And I have a notation here that Thoth told this author through direct transmission that there had been another sacred structure on the same location eons before the Great Pyramid. Also, that the completion date of 10,348 BC for the Temple of the Risen One refers only to its primary function of anchoring star geometries into the earth. There's been various builds and rebuilds on this site. This is the bottom line. I oversaw this construction and also that for the Temple of the Violet Flame. It's interesting because no more is given here about that Temple of the Violet Flame. It was not until 9,160 BC that I entered the genetic earthborn embodiment through which I would reassume my Thoth role as Raismes of Aphra. In this earthborn form, I would dwell for 300 years. After that time, I reincarnated on earth as Amenophis, architect to Akhenaten, Amenhotep, architect to Zoser, and Hiram Abif, architect to King Solomon, among other experiences. Quite a few other experiences. We could add, he's mentioning here ones that more connect to that Eastern culture, but there would be Quetzalcoatl and Christian Rosenkreutz was the last one. Trying to remember a few more. Of course, Merlin. Some of these are one of 5 souls of, and some of them are just direct, this is it, one soul. And there are others, of course, but I'm just naming a few. To continue with Thoth's statement here, Thoth Muzurud has been referred to in texts as Thoth the Atlantean, as my work with the Atlanteans was then prominent, but I was of pure Orion genetics. However, at the time of my birth, as the one who was to become Raismes of Aphra, it was necessary for me to embed the light grid of the risen temple within the genetics of the earth. When I returned to Egypt, the priests of the great temple saw beyond my physical body into the auric veil which surrounded my form, and they knew that he who is the Tatet, the Tehute, had returned. To those of my family and personal fold, I was known to them as Shansi, the Beloved. Thoth, Tatet, and Tehute are all forms of the same root, which are titles meaning one who gives breath to, or the grand communicator. Thoth Muzurud was known in Atlantis as the Sword of Orion. His origin is ultra-terrestrial from the 8th sphere of heaven. He tells me, now this is, I am speaking here, those comments directly first person, so to speak, have ended, and now I'm talking. He tells me that this denotes the dimension of his realm, which is the 8th. In that dimension, he contains the genetics of the light races of Orion, with the son of his creation being Rigel. As he communes with me in this space-time, Thoth or Tehute is both Thoth Muzurud and Thoth Raismes of Aphra, translated as mouth of the sun of the altar place. Mouth of the sun of the altar place. When he ascended at the end of his Raismes life experience, he did not at that time take his physical body with him, but instead left it in a state of suspended animation. He later returned to reclaim this form, merging it with his higher light body as Thoth Muzurud. In this way, he descended through the 9 layers of the earth and into the interior world, or inner cavity of the planet, wherein he now dwells within the central earth tribes. I will pause to say here that this entity that is still in the earth as appearing as Thoth Raismes of Aphra, maybe a little slightly differently, but close to that, because he now has embodied the other Thoth form. That's one embodiment of Thoth still with the earth, if not the inner earth, which is a slightly removed dimension. Then we have, of course, this mysterious Thoth Ami that's never mentioned in this book. But if I were to write this book, I would, include something about him. Thoth Ami is another form of his, looks much different than all of this, a dark, almost East Indian looking personage who kind of roams around with a small following of beings. And I don't really know much about him at all, but I was told about him in about 2003, I believe it was, something like that. And then there, of course, is the New Earth Thoth that I have seen and I try to depict more or less in Second Life, my Second Life Thoth avatar. I'm still working on a more perfected form on that. And then there's Ushael. And Ushael is the actual high soul, high magna-state form of this entity that has projected himself down in these various embodiments. None of this is explored in this particular book. This is about Raismes of Aphra. But I would include something like I'm telling you now in the preface somewhere so we understand the bigger picture here. Oops, I'm going to pause for just a moment. And so we're going back to apparently to Thoth's wording here, because he's speaking in first person again. So I'm getting back to that. Thoth Muzurud has been referred to in texts as Thoth the Atlantean, as my work with Atlantis was then prominent, but I was a pure Orion genetics. I think I've already read this, but I'm reading it again. However, at the time of my birth, as one who has become Raismes of Aphra, it was necessary for me to embed the light grid of the risen temple within my genetics, the genetics of the earth. Okay, here we go. And then I also read about him being known as Shansi to the beloved, to his people. So I should always hold my finger on the place I've left off so I'll know where it is again. He did the name, what his name meant, and that he dwells now within the Central Earth tribes as Thoth Raismes of Aphra, but really a little more progressed form of that. Okay, now here we go. Ultra-terrestrial, now I'm speaking here. Ultra-terrestrial is a term Thoth uses to define the spiritually evolved beings from whom we are descended through our star genetics. Extraterrestrials cover an assortment of types from other worlds who are at various degrees of spiritual and physical evolution, but are not spiritualized within their heart centers to a high degree. That's extraterrestrials. So we have ultra-terrestrials is a term Thoth uses to define the spiritually evolved beings from whom we are descended through our star genetics, and the extraterrestrials cover an assortment of types from other worlds who are at various degrees of spiritual and physical evolution, but are not spiritualized within their heart centers to a high degree. As you can tell, this is not a professional audiobook here. This is Maya wending her way through her ancient transcripts. Ultra-terrestrials come from the universe of the Metatronic light spiral. This spiral is the path of the full light spectrum. By light in this context is meant divine energy beyond the atomic level. The full light spectrum exists in what Thoth calls the Atosic universe. It is the unified field of all consciousness where there is no separation. It is the coming together of all time fields in universal strata, striking a harmonic in the center of the soul's atoma or central sun, composite of all 7 chakras. We on Earth, as well as the extraterrestrials, dwell in a half-light spiral or spectrum called the Aura Tron. The Oratronic spiral is incomplete, yet it is not warped. It contains the essence of the Metatron, but without the ability to create full consciousness movements. The starry field of Orion in the Atosic universal light grid is the holy home of Thoth. It was in Orion that the seam in the universe was rent in the event which created the universal tear. Thus, it is the role of the Iranians who remain in the Metatronic light of the Atosic to take the lead in the redemption of original light, gathering this trapped sacred energy back into the folds of the divine. Thoth Muzurud was the sword of Orion to the Atlanteans because they recognized him as a sword of truth and light, who came to the earth as an emissary of the light redemption factor of Orion. In the age when Thoth Muzurud descended into this world, he dwelt primarily in Atlantis, with periods of time spent among the tribes of the Central Earth. Thoth's entire mission was threefold. One was to bring the Earth's Enochian table, which was knowledge of sacred geometry for specific Earth structures to be built upon this sphere to aid us in our return to the Atosic universe. Originally, those whom Thoth calls the master builders of the sunbow set up patterns and grids upon and within the planet from which sacred temples arose. But as the etheric veil of the earth deteriorated, greater consciousness patterns were needed to be nested within Gaia form of this world, within the Gaia form of this world. His second planetary objective was to supervise these constructions so that they would be accomplished according to the greater plan. Thirdly, he was to bring to this realm a great deal of knowledge that had been lost from the hearts and minds of the earthborn. This he gave us in such works as the Emerald Tablets and many other books on such subjects as sacred geometry, alchemy, healing sciences, and the true genesis of our universe. And I have as a notation, all of his writings, as the Thoth, were not done pen in hand, but as direct transmissions into the Akashic records. Well, I probably should have qualified it as I stated earlier. I'm not saying all of his writings, all of his sacred books, would have been done that way. In reorienting this world with its true origins, he served to enlighten humans in that age that they were angels unaware. The full accomplishment of Thoth's threefold mission was extended through his life as Raismes of Aphra and on into this current day. His time with this world is not yet completed. This book is not about his experiences as Thoth Muzurud, but when he lived as Raismes. While it was Thoth Muzurud that he was master architect of the original temple of the Risen One, the Great Pyramid, as Raismes he again became its architect in greatly renovating it after the Atlantean deluge. Also as Raismes he wrote in the Akasha most of the Thoth texts, such as the Book of Thoth and the Pymander. Raismes seems to be considered by the greater Thoth being, with whom I communicate, as his golden moment on earth. It was a life he wishes me to help him reveal in the pages of Journey of the Beloved. And this concludes Chapter 1.